As the 2023 election draws near, there have been predictions from different groups and individuals about who will win the presidential election. Some have used the strength of each candidate regionally to arrive at their results, while others have used social media platforms to conduct polls to work out how the electorate will vote in 2023. One of such groups that have analyzed how the presidential election will play out is Next Year Consulting, which conducted a face-to-face poll of registered voters in rural communities in 12 states in Nigeria. The group's report breaks down how the top 4 presidential candidates will fare in the coming election. Also, from its report, 3 out of 4 Nigerians believe the country is headed in the wrong direction, and also focus on key issues that could shape the 2023 presidential election. Joining us on this show this morning, right now, as we discuss this report collated by Next Year Consulting, is Patrick Okigbo III, policy analyst and founding partner at Next Year. Welcome to the morning show, Patrick.
Thank you, Ruben.
Okay, quickly. We have this report that you have just released, 2023 presidential elections, electoral poll of rural communities in Nigeria. Sample size of 2,012 states, focusing majorly on the leading political parties, but specifically the People's Democratic Party and the APC. Could you just take us through this report and some of your findings? And why rural communities? Why not the urban areas?
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thanks for making an opportunity for us to share this report. As you said in your introduction, we've seen many polls done in the lead up to the 2023 elections. Many of those polls were done by telephone and focused on city centers. And we thought that one addition, or what's to plug the gap in the data we have, is to focus a little bit on the rural communities, isolate the issues around social media and its influence on these elections. And that's why we chose rural communities. We chose to select 2 states from each of the geopolitical zones, 1 state each controlled by PDP and APC. We also excluded the home states of the leading presidential and vice presidential candidates in the poll. Sample size, as you said, 2,000, margin of error about 2.2% at the 95% confidence interval. And again, all the survey respondents are registered to vote in the 2023 elections. Now, what are some of the key findings? 3 out of 4 of the survey respondents, said that they believe the country is heading in the wrong direction. And this ratio cuts across all the age groups that we surveyed. Major issues that Nigerians have: insecurity, bad governance, unemployment, and weak economy. Those are the major issues, but there were a few other issues as well. And if you look at voting intention, across the different regions in the country, you find that the P2B of the Labour Party leads on voting intention with 40.37%, Atiku Abubakar 26.7%, Bola Tinubu 20.47%. Rabiu Kwankwaso is at 5.16%. But what is most important, in my view, as we look at these numbers, is that you still have quite a large number of people who are undecided at about 7%. So that's something that these leading candidates could focus on. You take a regional view, there are no clear winners yet. Different candidates are strong in different regions. So if you take North Central, for instance, P2B leads there. But if you go to Northeast and Northwest, Atiku Abubakar leads, Bola Tinubu playing a close second in those regions. If you go to the South and Southeast, P2B leads in those regions. Southwest becomes very interesting because in Southwest, Bola Tinubu came in at about 37.4%. P2B a close second at about 24%. But again, something interesting about the region, about 20% are undecided. About 20% in the Southwest undecided. And you go through in terms of people of education, in terms of age range, P2B is preferred, mostly by the different age groups. Atiku Abubakar, highest preference amongst Muslims, while P2B is preferred by respondents who choose to identify their religious affiliations. Same thing for educational attainment across the different levels of education. P2B did well, with Atiku Abubakar and Bola Tinubu being preferred by respondents with no educational qualification or who chose not to mention their educational qualification. Same thing for employment status, and so on and so forth. Now, the last point I'd like to make is that about 83% of those polled said that their minds are made up. They're definite that they will not change their minds between now and election day. And finally, when we asked, how do you get your information on the different candidates? A large percentage of the respondents said they get it through radio, 32%, social media at 30%, and family and friends at 16.7%, and so on and so forth. Television came in fourth. At about 13%. So those were some of the key findings from the survey, and I'm happy to share more as we go along.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for breaking it down. It's interesting, just the last point you've made with regards to how people, the respondents, get their information. Top of it is traditional media, which is radio. And in a close second, the social media. This is quite instructive because when we've heard debates from principal partners from political parties running for presidency, in fact, they've often put down the influence of social media. However, we see that people actually are 29%, close to 30% of the respondents rely on social media. Would you classify this based on the age range of people that you polled? Why this strong leaning towards social media?
And it's actually more interesting because we focused on rural communities, right? And the way we define rural communities, we understand the classic definition of rural communities, everywhere that's outside the urban center. You can define it by distance from the urban center. You can define it by population size. One of the things we wanted really to test for is this story around the young people and the influence of social media. So we picked locations that are distant from urban centers, city centers. So we eliminated all city centers, and we also polled in only local communities where there are no tertiary institutions. Yeah, and it's interesting that social media still came a second, second to radio, and it cuts across most of the age groups, but mostly younger people. So the older people relied more on radio, they relied more on family and friends, but the younger generation, even in these rural communities, got their information from social media, which was quite interesting. But again, if you look at the number of, if you look at internet penetration in Nigeria, and you look at the number of cell phones, in the hands of people, you can begin to understand why some of those numbers hold out, even in rural communities.
Right. So I'd like to go back and dig into your methodology. What's your sample size like? And I'll also like you to expand on the conversation as regards demography. So you're saying this demography in the rural area. I mean, what's the demography? Was it a broad range of like your 18 to 52 or 65 or thereabouts? And what also informed your definition of terms for rural areas? So I'd like to know, for instance, the city, the rural towns and villages, you visited. Also, I could see that you had an allowance for your, margin of error. What informed that methodological interplay, for your margin of error? I saw your degree of confidence was very high, about like 96%. What are the variables, 95%, what are the variables, that counted for that?
Excellent. So our sample size was 2,000. And sometimes when we mention that we polled 2,000 people in a country of about 200 million people, the first reaction you get is, oh, the number is too small. Why didn't you do up to 10,000? Why didn't you do up to 20,000? Well, the idea behind sampling, or the theory of sampling in statistics, is that it depends on how you look at the sample. So the fact that you do 50,000 people does not give you a higher accuracy than if you did 2,000 people, if your sampling is wrong. And in this case, we sampled for age, we sampled for gender, and we corrected it for the population, in those states, to select who we polled. Now, in terms of the communities, how we defined a rural community, in my introduction, I said, we understand the classic definition, although there is no one definition of rural, but most scholars would look at everywhere that is outside the urban areas, and they would look at distance, from the urban areas. The US government, in their population definition, will look at rural communities as any place that has 50,000 population or less. In our case, we looked at distance from city centers. We also looked at institutions that define urbanity. And we use tertiary institution as one of those to say any local government area that has a tertiary institution, we eliminated it. So we went to places that are distant from city center. We also eliminated the city centers and went to places that are distant from it and places that did not have tertiary institutions. In terms of location where we polled, I think this might be the first time a pollster is releasing their location. So if you look at the reports that we shared, on the penultimate page, we included a link, which if you click on the link, you can drill down and see the exact location where our posters went to, because we use the tool that allows us to use GPS location to know exactly where the poster is. And if the poster is not where they're supposed to be, the tool did not accept the poll results. So in that way, we ensured that, one, they really went out, to do the poll, they went to the right places, and that they polled the right number of people for each age grouping, each gender grouping per the population of the area. The last question you asked was around the age. The groupings we used were 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, 65 to 74, and then 75 and above.
Okay, Patrick, look, let me understand something. What is the wisdom in excluding the home states of the 4 leading presidential candidates that this report looks at? Considering the fact that, how do you do a polling survey in Nigeria and you ignore Kano State, you ignore Lagos State, you ignore Anambra State, you ignore, do you get what I'm saying? So, in other words, that could raise questions about accuracy in terms of the true choice, of the people, even if here you say rural areas. Yes, we understand 72% of Nigerian population or whatever, are in the rural areas. But what is the wisdom in excluding the states of the leading candidates, which will be their strong areas in any case?
Yeah. So again, every poll tests for something. Yeah. And what we wanted to test for was the average Nigerian in a rural community, quite remote from the influences of the major cities and social media. How do they think about this election? And we chose to remove the states of the leading candidates because it could introduce some bias, positive, to those leading candidates. We wanted to test the average Nigerian who does not have that affiliation of being from the same state of origin with any of the leading candidates. How does that average Nigerian think about this election? Now, there's a poll that we're already planning for mid-December. In that poll, we're polling all Nigerians. We're polling city center, we're polling rural communities, all the states in the country, face-to-face polling, right? And that will give a different slant. But this particular poll wanted to understand the average Nigerian who's not under the influence of affiliation, state of origin affiliation with the candidates, who's not under the influence of a lot of the messages that go through on social media, right smack in the middle of town. How do they feel about this? And that is what we're showing with these numbers. Different polls can poll for different things and find different results. But in this instance, that's why we excluded the home states of the leading candidates.
All right, thanks, Patrick. Just another point from the findings from your poll or from your research. 3 out of 4 Nigerians believe the country is headed in the wrong direction. Now, breaking that information down, it's interesting to see the age range of people and how their optimism about where Nigeria is headed. It's interesting to see that from 55 to 64 years, those who think less about Nigeria's chances or where we're heading to, whilst the younger people are actually quite optimistic in terms of the numbers. And I found that quite interesting. It would be great to hear your thoughts around that, to see that older people are thinking we're headed in the wrong direction, whilst younger people are thinking, or less younger people think we're headed in the wrong direction. And then it was also, for me, what also is quite interesting for me is the outcome of the key issues for Nigerians, or the most important issues that the people you polled think should be on the table. First, of course, no surprises there, insecurity, following closely by corruption, bad leadership. However, I'm surprised that health comes last at 0.5% or 0.4%. Would you say that Nigerians or the people you polled, the sample that you polled, are confident in the health sector in Nigeria? Education came about 7. Also, bottom, just 5.7% of people think it's important to have a conversation around this. Bear in mind that you also looked at the educational background of the people you polled as a way to see how they were voting. It's interesting to see these outcomes. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
No, interesting question. First of all, I won't use pessimistic. I won't use optimistic in the first set of questions you asked. If you look at the data, those aged between 55 and 64 said that Nigeria, about 81.2% of them said Nigeria is moving in the wrong direction. If you look at those aged between 18 and 24, 76% said Nigeria is moving in the wrong direction. So relative to the older generation, the younger generation are saying it's moving in the wrong direction, but the older generation is saying are more vehement in saying that it's moving in the wrong direction. But on average, across all age groups, 76% said Nigeria is moving in the wrong direction. So I'm not sure if the younger people are more optimistic. I think what you might have is that the older folks, people in the 45 to maybe 64 age group, have seen a Nigeria that kind of works. Nigeria has never quite worked for any of us, but they've seen a Nigeria that kind of worked a bit. And then the younger people, those aged between 18 and 24, may not, they were born into this, so they think that this is what it is. So that's probably why some of the older people are thinking, this can't be right. We know that this can work better. Where we are today is not good. We need to move from there. To the second set of questions you asked, what we did with this question, this was actually an open-ended question. So we did not give the options. We just said to people, in your own words, what is it that you want somebody to fix today? And, as with polls, you get long sentences, you get short phrases. And what we did was to then codify, all of those responses. And that's why if you look at, say, the second grouping, it's corruption, bad leadership, and governance. So there are a number of things that are going on in there. But clearly, insecurity in whatever words that were used by the respondents came out tops. Now, health came out at less than 1%. I can't explain why. Maybe, and it's relative to all of these other issues. So people are saying health is an issue, but relative to insecurity, it's a lower issue. Relative to bad governance, it's a lower issue. Relative to unemployment, it's a lower issue. So I think what folks are saying is fix insecurity for us, give us good leadership, get the economy working again, that it creates jobs, solve poverty. We need food. Food was something that was mentioned a lot. It came in at 6%. And when we fixed all of this, then, health will focus on that. Not that health is not important, but relative to all of these other things, these other ones are more important.
Right. So another thing I'd like to, dig deep into is your methodology. And I know you use what they call an enumeration method. You probably sent enumerators out there that had a fact sheet that interviewed them one-on-one and all of that. And that's way more expensive to do. And that's why kudos to you for the 2,000 sample size. I have a rough idea how much that will cost you, and next year, I do some of this data work myself. So you've got that, but there's also something with enumeration we call enumerator's bias. Mm-hmm. In your modeling, what allowance did you leave for enumerator's bias? And also, what was the peer review mechanism for the raw data submitted for the enumerators that went out there to have this one-on-one interviews and interactions and all of that?
Fantastic, Rufai. You've asked the question like someone who really understands the space. And those are all the critical issues we had to contend with. Enumerator's bias is a major issue. The second issue is actually when the respondents tell you what they think you want to hear. And let me dwell a little bit on that. If you look at all the polls that came out in the build-up to the Trump-Hillary campaign, or even Trump-Biden campaign, but more Trump-Hillary, most of them said that Hillary was going to win, because Trump supporters felt that it wasn't acceptable for them to claim that they were supporting Trump. So there's that bias on that side. We saw it again in the Lula-Bolsonaro polls, where many of the people who supported Bolsonaro did not feel that they could say to pollsters that they supported Bolsonaro because of this big the expectation that if you're progressive, you should support Lula. Last example, in the build-up to the U.S. midterm elections, we saw that again. Most of the pollsters said the Republicans were going to do a clean sweep. It did not happen because most of the people who were going to support the Democrats did not feel like they could say it. And that was also one of the reasons why we eliminated the home states of the leading candidates. It was also one of the reasons why we went to rural Nigeria to see if we could eliminate that bias on the part of the respondents. But on the part of the enumerators, the best we can do, which is what most pollsters do, is on training. And training enumerators in the way they ask the question and in understanding the importance of the data that we're trying to collect. And if you go through as the enumerating and uploading it on the app, and we're seeing it on the back end, we can kind of track and see how that's going and keep engaging, with the enumerators to make sure that what is being reported is what the respondent is saying. Then in terms of the peer review, we had a team within our office of myself and two other partners and a number of external parties that we work with out of the UK. There's a polling company out of the UK that does work across the world, especially in Europe and parts of Africa, who joined in the review of 1, the methodology, 2, the process, and 3, the analysis, because another area where you can introduce bias is in the coding of the responses, especially the open-ended questions. And we had a credible team look at that, debate the issues to then come up with the final results that we presented.
Okay, in the report, one of the things you stated, although we're running out of time very quickly, is that most of the respondents got their information about the candidates from radio, from social media, from family and friends. Which of these platforms will you consider to have been the most important for persons in the rural areas? And what kind of strategy will you then recommend to candidates moving forward?
Okay, so what we presented is what they said to us. They said to us, radio is the number one. Social media actually surprised me. I thought social media would be, way down the line. So I was actually quite surprised that social media came in as second. In terms of strategy, it's not my place to advise the candidates on their strategy. It's my place to provide data. What they do with the data is up to them. In fact, because we self-funded this, we're also opening up our data to any of the political parties that wants to look at the data, wants to see the raw data, wants to work with it to shape their own strategy or whatever. It's open to everyone. But it's not in our place to advise anyone on strategy or what they do or what they don't do. We just hope that this presents a view to Nigerians and the political institutions on how things are shaping out.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick Okigbo III, for joining us on the morning show.